What happens with employee pay if an employer shuts down during a hurricane? This question is top of mind for a lot of employees in the US in the last few weeks because it's pay. But it's also top of mind for a lot of employers, like business owners, HR, who don't always know the ins and outs of how these things work. In short, outside employment lawyers have made a lot of money on this question in the last few weeks. And a caveat: yes, I'm a trained lawyer, I've worked in HR, I do not practice law anymore, so I will never give legal advice, especially not on social media. Nobody should. But I do like to break down kind of complex concepts so people can understand the ins and outs. Now, this question talked about these closures, like if an employer does shut down during a hurricane, what happens to salaried employees? Well, let's talk about everybody and what you may have to do, what law may apply, but also what you can choose to do. So let's say a hurricane's coming, organization shuts down. So let's first actually talk about hourly non-exempt employees. Well, in the US, the federal law is the Fair Labor Standards Act, the FLSA. And under that, hourly non-exempt employees generally only have to be paid for the hours they actually work. And that doesn't get impacted by whether the employee chooses not to work or the employer says you can't work. And so if an hourly employee doesn't work, they generally don't have to be paid by law. That's the federal law. In the US, we have a bit of a patchwork because it's really hard to get federal laws passed, or you right now have like Department of Labor regulations that will be struck down in court. So you also have state and local laws, depending on where you are, that can apply. No, I'm not a wizard, I don't know all of those. But as a general concept, hourly employees, if you haven't worked, even if your employer says no, you can't come to work, then you don't have to be paid by law, generally. Salaried employees are different. So under that federal FLSA, salaried exempt employees, if you're paid that specific salary, then you have to be paid that if you work at all during a regular work week. And your work week can depend on how your employer defines it. Like it might be Sunday to Saturday, might be Monday to the following Sunday, like you get the drill. But that's how that law works. And so as long as you work during that week, you have to be paid your full salary. There are different reasons under the FLSA that you can dock someone's pay, but closures for like a natural disaster aren't generally one of them. And so if the employer says, hey, we're going to shut down for 2 days, they may, by law, often be able to not pay the hourly employees, but still have to pay the salaried employees. And some people are like, wait, but my employer isn't following the FLSA. And again, I'm not going to weigh in on that, but I will say who the FLSA applies to. I've made videos on this. So the FLSA isn't like some employment laws where it's like it applies if you have 25 or more employees, things like that. It actually looks at revenue. And so it's looking at like businesses that make 500,000 or more in a year. And so things like nonprofits are tricky because it can depend if a nonprofit like does services for money or things like that, of whether the nonprofit is covered by the FLSA or not. So that depends. But it is one of the laws that tends to cover far more employers than some others in the US. So overall, from a legal perspective, again, generally hourly employees no, salary employees yes, unless that business closes for like a week or more. So people are like, okay, so I still have to get paid. All right. Well, what organizations can do, what employers can do, even for those exempt employees, is they can say, okay, yeah, we'll still pay you, but we'll charge it against your paid time off balance, your vacation or any other time off. And depending on the employer's policies, employers generally can do that. So they can say, yeah, you get paid, but now you're down a couple of vacation days. For exempt, like the non-exempt hourly employees, some employers will say to be paid for this day, you have to take paid time off. You have to take vacation or substitute that. So that's a way that some hourly employees may get paid. And so again, the employer often doesn't have to pay hourly employees, may have to pay salaried employees, but they can also require you often to use things like other paid time off. So that can be deducted from your bank. Okay, let's say someone that's a salaried employee and does not have any paid time off available. Again, generally that person still has to be paid, but they don't have any paid time off to deduct. So you win. But that's all the kind of the laws that can apply. And again, there's like state, local things, but that's from the general perspective. That's why you tend to see those things happen in employers, of why someone might still get paid that, but that gets deducted and that's not your choice. And again, it can depend on like what your policy says, things like that, but employers, especially in the US, tend to be able to do that. So while you get paid, it comes out of whatever your paid time off bank is. That's the have to do part. What I often talk about, and this is why I stopped being a lawyer and moved into manager training and do that, is there's so much that you can do to make workplaces better. And so a lot of employers have this mentality of like, what do we have to do? So they're spending money on their outside employment lawyers who can charge literally like $1,000 or more an hour to be like, what do we have to do to be in compliance? When they're not taking the time to think about like, what's the real experience like for my team members right now? Like, natural disasters don't happen that often, but it's almost a virtual guarantee that during that, your team is scrambling. You may have teams that are already paycheck to paycheck. And so now, whether you're not paying your employees because you're going to be closed, they bear the brunt of that. Or whether you make it come out of vacation banks and things like that of your other employees, whether hourly or salaried, you force it to come out of paid time off. Now someone has been through a pretty traumatic experience. They certainly wouldn't call that day a vacation day. And now they may have had plans to take their family on something, and they can't because they don't have any time left now, or they can't afford to take more time off to unpaid vacation to be out of work. And so this is why for organizations, I generally encourage as much as you can, paying people for that time off and just knowing, there absolutely are things like many businesses have business interruption insurance that, depending on the natural disaster, you can get insurance payments to help those things. But the human lens, when you have people that are really going through struggles and need that, it can be helpful to show that level of humanity to pay people during that time. So yes, I know the question was about laws, but I always have to use this opportunity to just remind leaders of what that experience is like. And if you don't know firsthand, maybe you're not there in that area, or you're not, your situation is such as you're not as paycheck to paycheck, understanding from your team of what the reality is like, that you have a lot of options. There's no law I'm aware of that wouldn't require you to pay your employees, pay all of your employees, pay hourly employees, pay everybody, and not take it from their vacation time. I'm not aware of any law that would prohibit that from happening. And so human Ashley would tell you that that is a way to have your teams want to stay and work with you more, care more about their work when they're there. So because the way people work is really impacted by how you treat them in the worst of times. So yes, question was about laws, but I will give my lesson in the end about options that you can do as well. I hope that's helpful.